Good evening. Welcome to Print London's Mastering Lithography Tips from the Pros series of talks featuring Canadian artists who have demonstrated a mastery of lithography. It's wonderful to see so many of our members and friends here tonight, virtually coming from far and wide. I'm Jocelyn Gardner, founder and chair of Print London, and on behalf of our collective of London and area printmakers, I'm pleased to welcome you here tonight. We're fortunate to have artist and printer Pudy Tong sharing his work with us from Canada's largest printmaking workshop, Open Studio in Toronto. Before we begin, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we'd like to acknowledge that the land on which Print London gathers is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples, who have long-standing relationships to the land, water, and region. To the land, water, and region of this region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations of Turtle Island. Before I introduce Pudy Tong, I'd like to note that this series of talks has been made possible by a Community Arts Investment Plan 2020 grant from the London Arts Council and the City of London. We also acknowledge our gratitude to Satellite Project Space, with whom we partner annually for our summer programming. This evening, Print London Vice Chair Cindy Talbot will be helping to facilitate our Zoom event. Cindy will advise us on how to have the best viewing experience. Over to you, Cindy.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Cindy Talbot and I'm the Vice Chair of Print London. I have a few technical housekeeping notes for those of you that are joining us on Zoom. If you haven't already, please mute your mic and turn off your video. If you're joining from a laptop, you should see a toolbar along the bottom of your screen where you can click on the microphone icon to mute and the video icon to turn off your video. If your toolbar is not visible, hover over the bottom of the Zoom window and with your mouse, and you should see those options. If you're joining on a cellular device, tap your screen to bring up the toolbar, click on the microphone icon to mute and the video icon to turn off the video. For optimal viewing on your laptop, select the speaker view. If you click into view in the upper right-hand corner of the window where you see your face, my face, whoever's face is viewed right now, you should be able to click speaker view. And lastly, we'll be fielding questions during the presentation for Pudy to answer. If you've got a question, type it into the chat box and our moderator, Jocelyn Gardner, will read out the questions to Pudy. You can find the chat box by clicking in the toolbar that I just directed you to. Click on the three dots and more, and then click chat. You'll see the option to send the chat to everybody or just a private message. We'll ask you to send it to everybody so that we don't get any duplicate questions. And then finally, if you're viewing through Facebook Live or Instagram Live, you can type your questions into the discussion below the live stream, and our moderator, Scotia Martignac, will pass them along to Jocelyn via the Zoom chat. And I think that's everything, Jocelyn, so back to you.
Great, thank you, Cindy. So tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce artist and printer Pudy Tong as a final speaker in Print London's Mastering Lithography Tips from the Pros series of artist talks. I've not personally had the pleasure of working with Pudy yet. However, I've admired the work that he has done as a custom printer for Jenn Law and Penelope Stewart, among many other respected artists. Pudy has been working with traditional stone lithography and photographic plate lithography for approximately 15 years, having been irretrievably attracted to the medium during his undergraduate studies at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, and later at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design University, where he received his MFA. Inspired by his childhood memories of piles of Chinese newspapers that would be delivered to his doorstep in the British Columbian rural small town where he grew up, Pudy's conceptually intriguing works play on the language of news media, in particular newspapers, often honing in on the distortions of reality found there through visible erasures of small details that shift meaning, or through blurring and shape-shifting words to question and provoke the viewer to pay attention to the information that they are consuming. Pudy was awarded Open Studio's Nick Novak Fellowship in 2017 and continues to work at Open Studio as both an artist and custom printer. Great, Pudy, I'd like you to share your screen now. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for Jocelyn for the invites. And thank you for her glowing introduction. It has reminded me of things that I have even forgotten about. It's really nice to see my words reflected back at me, but differently and amplified. Can everybody see my screen okay? But let's begin here on a reflective note. I'm broadcasting you and speaking to all of you out there at Open Studio, which acknowledges that it is situated on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we continue to create and exist. As we approach yet another anniversary of this country's founding, may we reflect on and take action on efforts of reconciliation. And I hope that you do so in your area, be those efforts be personal, financial, or of a political capacity. I would next like to say a great thank you to Jocelyn, who has invited me to speak at this event as the final speaker of this wonderful series of some wonderful people who have already talked to you guys, including Joe Graham and Otis, whose last name does not need to be mentioned. So I would like to cap off this series by continuing and maybe expanding on some of the things that they have already touched on. So part of their collaborative printing philosophies, Joe Graham said, and I quote, was to demand the best of our artists, to challenge them. And she wondered and used as her guiding principle how best to translate the artist's work into printmaking. While Otis honed in to amplify the artist's vision and perhaps seduce the artist to the medium or introduce the artist to the medium so they can become seduced by the medium itself. And I really believe and operate upon this, I guess, process of translation is one of the primary things that I do. In the translator's notes to Xixing Liu's three-body problem, the translator Ken Liu writes, the act of translation involves breaking down one piece of work in one language and ferrying the pieces across a gulf to reconstitute them into a new work in another language. And throughout this talk, I would like to navigate this gulf mentioned here, the space that I am familiar with my own practice that brings a certain subjectivity and perspective to the custom printing projects that I take on. My deep dive into photo-lithography came after my MFA thesis exhibition at NASCA University in Halifax. My practice has always oscillated between analog printmaking and more digital experiments, which in my mind are along the same continuum as modes of communication or dissemination of information in general. So what we're looking at here on the screen is a live projection of a piece called Editorial. So what it's doing is displaying the current front page image from the Globe and Mail website. This was back in 2010. The code to do this has long been extinct, and our digital newspaper journalistic landscape has changed significantly. And also the speed at which it moves has changed drastically as well. But at this point, it was a relevant topic as things were starting to speed up and we didn't know how to contend with the deluge of information that we're getting. And I would probably argue that we still don't really know how to do that well to this day. So riffing off of the cinematic trope of the spinning newspaper, you know, the one that goes ooh in like Looney Tunes and other things like that. This version slows it down significantly. It kind of moves pixel by pixel. And the spin rate, if you want to get nerdy about it, is calculated by measuring how long the previous image was on the front page, and then a full 360 degrees will fill up the full duration of time. Say if the previous image was on the front page website of the front page, for 3 hours, it would take 3 hours for it to spin a full 360 degrees. Here it is in front of the computer. In the gallery that is kind of overlooking the main gallery space here. And it is just to show you that it is indeed showing the contemporary and up-to-date front page that is on the website. Another piece in this exhibition was this quiet sculpture right here of scale newspaper models skewered on a receipt spindle. And I added one daily over the course of a 2-week exhibition. So this is another take on a spinning newspaper. Because if you spin it on the spindle, it would kind of do the same thing. So as many artists in the audience knows, the free fall after spending however much time dedicated time to create something, such as a thesis exhibition, there's always a lingering itch, a lingering question of what's next. And usually when I'm in this free fall state, I ground myself in the familiar process of usually analog printmaking. So I went back in the studio and see what I could come up with. And this was the results. So these are some of the prints that I came up with. These are actually some of the first prints that I printed here at Open Studio on that press right there when I first arrived in 2010. So what's happening here? This is basically one image spun many times on different axes. And because of the nature of printmaking and the way photographic film is outputted, what tends to happen is a moire pattern is created, a kind of blurring and buzzing when a certain configuration of dots are misaligned. So each of these have been repeated 9 times, printed on top of each other. And while the moire pattern is usually avoided, it is often seen as a technical oversight or a misprint. I feel I've harnessed it to kind of point focus in different parts of these extremely staged images. Of the flag, of the tie, of Obama's pin. All these images were printed using only 1 plate, using a very complex system of T-bar registration. I wish I still have some of the plates lying around. I may have 1 lying around, but it's quite a mysterious artifact of cryptic markings. So let's go into a bit of a sidebar about photo-lithography 101 for people who are not familiar with the process or only know the stone method. So with photolithography, we start with a film, either hand-drawn or printed from a digital printer. And you would need really opaque toner ink or really opaque way of mark making. In this case, the film on the top left here was done using toner and hairspray. And then the film is placed over top of photosensitive aluminum plates and exposed to UV light. the parts of the photosensitive emulsion that got exposed to UV light will wash away within the development process. And then after that, your bottom left image, and that plate will get inked up, run through the press against a piece of paper, and then you result with a print on your lower right. And voila. So lithography has always been a technology of mass production printing, and this photo-based emulsion method is just the latest iteration. So from before, it was limestone you used to draw on. Now it is aluminum. Instead of using grease-based materials, you are using film or film plus a photosensitive emulsion. And this lithography method is still mainly used today in high-end offset printing and the printing of newspapers. And the other advantage of using this process on aluminum is you can wrap them over big industrial rollers, which save space. And because you can spin them really, really fast, you can print a lot of them at a time. So it was only a matter of time that I also printed newspapers. Like, not me personally, but had a newspaper place print them. So this was the year 2016, 2017. This was the lead up to part of and the lead up to the exhibition that was part of my Nick Novak fellowship that I received here at Open Studio. So in 2016, a certain reality television personality became the president of the United States of America. And it was an era of alternative facts. And to counter that, a notable increase in emphasis on fact-checking, formally at a journalistic level or even at an individual level. So I made some spot differences puzzle book. I don't know how well you could see each individual page here, but the title page says the unauthorized DT activity book. It is irresistible. It is absorbing, meticulous, and incomplete. Can you find them all? So these were screenshots from the film All the President's Men. And I made spot the differences puzzles out of them by doctoring tiny details and see if the viewer could spot them. Let's do one right now. It's kind of hard to do over Zoom because once I go to the next slide, they're gonna jump out at you because that's how our eyes work. But if they were just imagine them side by side. I chose the number 6 because from my experience of doing these puzzles, when you get to 5 or 6, you kind of, it gets really difficult for some reason. But I'm going to flash to the next one. I'm going to go back and forth a couple of times, and then we could probably all spot the 6 differences. It'll be a freebie for y'all. Boop. 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 I particularly like the nose. Very caricature. In addition to printing that book in an actual newspaper industrial method, I ran them as photolithographs as well, just so we could get that luscious litho black here. And we could run it at a slightly higher resolution. And these are, back to what Otis was saying, these are really seductive. Here they are on the wall. in the exhibition. So these are a close-up of these prints installed in the main gallery space here at Open Studio. Special shout out to my partner Anyan Lam, who suggested and made these little pasties for the magnets, whose shiny chrome surface would have been entirely distracting from the warm, rich tones of this print in the paper. So there they are. We're not gonna talk about what's in the middle there. We're just gonna concentrate on things on the walls, to your left and to your right, and the stack of newspapers in the center that were free to take for all gallery goers. So what does one do with so many of these broadsheet activity books? Well, initially I had planned to intersperse them within racks of the commuter newspapers that they have at the TTC subway stations. I have had a videographer booked and lined up to film candid reactions from people interacting with them. However, as these things go, the paper folded a couple of weeks before it was scheduled to happen. And I think the Star tried to run a publication in that space and for that audience, but it was also short-lived, and there remains no commuter newspaper to this day. Speaks to the times, I guess. So this previous image belies what they look like now. They're just empty, sad metal things. So as a result, the best I could do was leave them on the streetcar and trains by my hand, or recruited some other members of Open Studio to take them home and leave them along their routes when they're on the commutes. I have a PDF of this. People could just message me and I'll send you a copy. I had a dedicated website built for this project, but I only signed up for the domain and web space for 3 years in hopes that I don't need to renew it. And since he didn't get elected, I didn't have to renew it. So I've yet to put it back online, but I'll put it back online soon. So that's a little bit of background about my work and about my vantage point about how I either see the world or communicate, and as a result, how I would communicate photo-lithography as concept or mode of production to visiting artists when I work with them during their visiting artist residencies. So the submission deadline has been paused, but follow Open Studio and get up to date to when this resumes again. But a little bit about the residency. It provides mid-career artists, mid-career or established artists with the opportunity to create a project in print media using methods that range from traditional to experimental approaches. As a VA, you will work with a collaborative printer like me in the studio to create print-based works, which will be exhibited post-production and a group show in Open Studio's main gallery. Artists with and without print experience are encouraged to apply. However, it is oftentimes that I get paired up with artists with no print experience, which is great fun. And one of the main benefits offered for this VA artist residency is collaborative printing assistance of up to 60 hours. So in this program, we usually allot a quarter or maybe a third of our time budget to show the artist the ropes, to demonstrate to them the vocabulary and strengths of the medium, and perhaps getting them seduced in the process. So the first artist that I'm going to talk about is the work I did with Colin Miner. So he's a Toronto-based multidisciplinary photographer and a founding member of the Mori Collective. And the work he brought to me was this catwalk project right in the bottom right here that's listed. It reads here, Catwalk supports experimental artistic practices and transdisciplinary events, often with a more than human focus. And this is what their Instagram kind of looks like. So within our initial kind of testing out the waters, he was blown away and by the materials, the colors, and process of lithography. So he didn't want to make prints at all. He was like, this is it. Like, this is the thing and I'm gonna do. So the show he ultimately put together was mainly consisting of the litho plates themselves. So we made a variety of films and shot, you know, multiple images onto these litho plates. And he installed them, and this was the work. So these plates were mounted off the wall, kind of arranged like a cat tree of one of those cat wall mazes with little cat toy accents. And as his collective's name suggests, moire kind of became a central feature of this. So we had two intersecting films, two intersecting configuration of dots, and we didn't complicate it too much. Just two different moires. I mean, two different films to make a fairly simple moire. So it is quite a whimsical and lighthearted practice. This is a particularly nice image here. And of course, the pivot point, or where the two films intersect, is where the kitty's butthole is. I think this is the moment that I miss like in-person artist talks. So I'm just gonna pause for laughter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We ran some fundraising prints, and the color we chose was the green of the plates themselves before they get, you know, aged a little bit. They look kind of blue when you put them on the wall for a little while. And we printed these on the clear, not clear, what's the word? Frosty Mylar film that we won't run through the laser printer to print some of our films. So process, about process, about process. This is me working with Kotama Bouabane. Look at us, so young and innocent, maskless in the studio during early 2020. That's when we started time together. I think we had just made plans and then it was paused because of the pandemic. We managed to finish up the project in the latter part of the year during that little gap between full lockdown and then the reinstating of the stay-at-home order. But yeah, happiness. So as an artist who was entrenched in photography, the translation to bitmap pattern didn't really come close to the resolution of the silver gelatin pigments that he was used to in photos or like photography proper. So we took a different tact and we focused more on papers and on printing larger flats, something that he wasn't quite used to working with. So Kotama brought in a bunch to test on. These were high-end washi that he's been using to run digital prints and experiment with. So you see in the photo, there is the little tag for each of the papers that we used. This was a test image. I didn't know if it was, you know, ultimately meant anything, but we just had to put something on paper. In addition to these papers, he also brought in, on the other end of the spectrum, brightly colored paper towels and napkins. So after some testing, but surprisingly not that much, it was mainly finding the right balance between loose enough ink that would serve the image. Specifically, it would fill in flat fields, and also finding the printing pressure that doesn't flatten the textures of the paper towel or napkins. So that's a close-up of one of our tests. It was a swan pattern that he found embroidered, whose texture and pattern kind of played off of the pattern in the paper towel themselves. So we additioned a bunch of these in different color combinations on different napkins. I guess the two main setups was the 4 one for the 4-fold ones, and then the 3 swan one for the ones that were folded in this 6-fold pattern. We even did a black on black. Unfortunately, I don't have documentation of it, but it was pretty special. And for the white paper we printed on, Kotama wanted to print the swirly design he found on a vintage photography envelope, a kind of family heirloom, if I recall correctly. So, you know, the photography envelopes, the ones that you get back when you drop off roll of film at a photo place, and after an hour or longer, you get an envelope back with your negatives and prints in it, you know, those photo envelopes. So when deciding on how to color separate the layers on this print, you could usually just, you know, do a count, and then it looks pretty straightforward. But upon closer inspection, it appears that the green was just a cyan layer overlapped upon a yellow layer. So you can see a bit of the cyan bleeding out on top of the black edge right there, because of course an industrial printing company at the time would try to economize their number of layers and using process colors they already had on hand. And a very diluted application of those colors, I might add. We had to desaturate it quite a bit when we were printing and running our edition. So we printed these. And we actually can see the original sleeve on the bottom left there, and the color matching that we did. Here they are installed in the gallery in these bright orange frames, which really add to the piece, I feel. And beside them are spring rose silhouettes printed on paper towel rolls. The swans, unfortunately, didn't make it to the show. In the ideal world where hours and budgets were limited, we would have printed the entire roll. But what we did print did help imply to the viewer that there may be more behind, and that the entire roll will be filled with this pattern. Let's talk about Erika DeFreitas. She's a Scarborough-based artist whose practice includes the use of performance, photography, video, installation, textiles, works on paper, and writing. Placing an emphasis on process, gesture, and the body, documentation, and paranormal phenomena, she works through attempts to understand concepts of loss, post-memory, inheritance, and objecthood. So the starting point for the VA project with Erika was these photos that she took at the Louvre, I think, of these draped classical statues that were in the garden as they were being protected from the renovations that were taking place on the grounds. So we decided to see what they would look like cut out, and we had to work through whether or how to include the shadows. And at the end of the day, the shadows didn't make it, not in printed form anyway. So these are some of the prints that we printed. Fronts and backs of the same sculpture. And here's the other one. There was also a textural component to this. And here we are trying to lay them out in the most direct way we know how, which is with tape, computer printouts, and cut newsprint. I work on the computer a lot, but this is also very nice and satisfying. So this is the culmination of the work, strung together in installation. So some of the black acetate cutout shapes that you see on the walls are the shadows of the sculptures that I mentioned earlier. We experimented with running monoprints off of them, but didn't quite get the desired result, but they do live and contributed to the show in this form. This collection called An Object, a Gesture, a Scene. More installation shots. And that's another peek at a long text piece in the middle there. So she put this on in 2019 at Open Studio at the culmination of the VA art projects, the VA residencies rather. And this work had continuous or second life. When she put on a second iteration of some of these pieces within a growing vocabulary and collection of photographic objects that she has been making. So this is An Object, a Gesture, a Scene, number 2. That was a solo show at the Visual Arts Center of Clarington, where she expanded on some of these themes and put these prints amongst other images, objects, and videos. Let's browse through that a little bit. It's really nice to see how the work we make with the visiting artists not only become part of their practice at the time, but sometimes it may help with either setting trajectories visually or conceptually and influence the work they make in the future in however overt or subtle ways. Okay. In addition to printing with visiting artists through the VA program, I also do custom printing with artists who just have an interest in photolithography, more often than not seeking the specific strengths of the medium. So a high level of photographic detail, the ability to print on many kinds of delicate Japanese washi papers. It's great at printing small text, just to name a few. But where do I even begin to talk about my custom printing with Jenn Law? We could probably fill at least an hour's worth of content, like tag teaming with you, Jenn, who is in the audience, I presume. about all the various projects we've done over the years. Jenn first approached me in circa 2013 to print a small series of images of her handwriting that she wanted to create in a varied edition, experimenting with like different gradient rolls. And we tried to meet up every year after that first meeting to produce a project after that. And until the point where we try to come together into the studio at least once a week to maintain a consistent pace of practice, experimentation, and production. But COVID. So thank you for Anne, who captured this excellent photo of us, making us look more professional than we actually are. And we were probably looking at a version of Louis that we see on the bottom right here. But unfortunately, we're not going to talk about the still project today. Instead, we're going to talk about extents. I'll just read this because Jenn is a really good writer, and I'm just going to take her word for it. Extant considers the legacies of three celebrated authors, Virgil, Emily Dickinson, and Franz Kafka, who requested in their wills that their unfinished works and or their correspondence be burned upon their deaths. In each case, their work was spared and has gone on to inspire countless writers and readers. Here, carefully handcrafted, imagined artifacts of these authors are seemingly rescued from the flames. Partially destroyed, the works revel in their salvation while prompting the viewer to contemplate the impact of their near absence on the history of Western literature and culture. Each lithographed artifact blurs the boundary between the real and the imagined, the faithful forgery and the elusive original. Tapping into our angst over things left undone, this work deliberates on the will of the artist, literally and figuratively, pondering the delicate tipping point between annihilation and preservation, obscurity and immortality. I know the talks have been a little bit light on the technical tips aspects, so I'm gonna give y'all a nugget right here. This is a piece from Extant. It is a 3-layered lithograph on washi. That is a typo with hand coloring, an addition of 5. So my first tip for aspiring photo-lithography users or people working in a photo-based manner in printmaking is that the CMYK split is only the starting point. If you can print with the colors directly, don't rely on the CMYK to mix the color optically for you on the page. The CMYK algorithm takes the white of the paper into account, and depending on your output resolution, you may end up with white paper or white paper gaps, in addition to isolated stray dots of pure color that may detract from the overall print, especially when these prints are intended to be encountered up close, as these definitely were. Where possible, these were a book size, or at least 1-to-1 size to the originals. So what? Okay, so we started with a scan of this book that Jenn artfully burned. And we had to decide how to print it to convey all the dustiness, all the crisp edges, all the charred edges. We could have taken CMYK route, but if we do that, if we look closely, there will be these dots. And the dot pattern, while useful to achieving the color that you want, often becomes a little flat because it is an inorganic pattern upon an inorganic pattern, and our eyes are really good at picking out things that are inorganic. And the way sometimes the computer sees black is a little troublesome because we just want that to be full black. So instead, we just build it. We consider each layer as if we were painters, and we lay it down and we draw it. Gil. Do you think Virgil's friends called him Gil or Verge? Anyway. So this is the separation that we came up with. I don't know if these are the correct colors because it's been a while since we printed them, and we just have color drawdowns of browns and ochres and that color range all over the studio. So I don't even remember which ones we used for what project. And all together and get that. And for the little, singes, we just hand color them. I think what Jenn did was just rub a bit of pigment with her finger. The other author involved in this series is Kafka. So what Jenn did was using a pyrography pen. I guess people usually use them on wood to make little burnt drawings and carvings and stuff like that. She did that to these notebooks and did a kind of blackout poetry with them. I don't know how high the resolution is on your screen, so I'm just gonna read this poem out loud for y'all. In this life, you want to fight against what you lack. And so, in answer, all you offer me is faith and dust. So this was another 3-color lithograph again. We approached it kind of like we did the Virgil. There was a light layer that implies the singeness that's kind of around the text, a darker singe layer, and then a full black for the darker edges and for the text itself. I picked this one out of the 6 because we're rushing these last pieces for the framers, and in my haste, I left out the word is by mistake, just as an oversight. We were just rushing. So once that was noticed, we ran back in the studio, and all we printed that day was the word is into these ones. Emily Dickinson. These are also 3-layered lithographs. Installed in cut plexi frames so you can see the front and the back of them. Gonna go back a little bit and just say, Jenn is really good at mixing ink. We call her like a mixologist. So it was kind of no problem to match the ink color to the artifact that is actually in the archives at Amherst College. So art and studio meetups have obviously been on hiatus since the pandemic, but she's been keeping busy with these new experiments in unfired clay. So we've been having some conversations about that. I mean, there's a lot of other print stuff on the back burner that we're happy to get to, but let's just talk about this stuff because it's new and exciting. So yeah, this feels like a mood board of some sort. So we're structuring our conversations around these 6 memos for the next millennium by Italo Calvino, which covers topics like likeness, quickness, exactitude, visibility, multiplicity, inconsistency. And I have been experimenting with these. I don't know if they were in the previous slide, but Jenn has been baking clay clouds. And during the pandemic, I've just been 3D modeling. And maybe putting CMYK bitmaps on 3D objects. I don't know if this is anything. I guess that's kind of a full circle to the digital experimentations that we started this talk with about the oscillation between the analog and digital. And we'll see what comes next. And there is plenty of time for Q&A, so let's do that.
Thank you, Pudy. That's fabulous. We do have a few, or I think there were a few questions along the way. There was certainly one about paper. Let's get back to it. I think that was Morgan Weatherspoon. Wondering about the paper. Oh yeah, wondering about the paper you used for the photolithos, All the President's Men.
Oh, that's a classic Hitakata. Yeah, it's, I guess they call it the student grade washi. You can get them on rolls. I don't know if there's a shortage now though. I haven't restocked in a while, so I do not know. And it had the tone that I wanted. And it's pretty smooth.
Okay, if people would like to ask questions verbally, you can as well. Once we can, we don't have people warring over it. There are, oh, there's a response here from Heather. The sizes have gone down of classic Kitakata. And Anne is saying, thanks, Pudy, great talk. I love how your art practice feeds your collaborative or custom work. Can't wait to be in the studio again. And that's very, you know, that is something that has stood out in your talk, the way in which your collaborations are very rich in terms of the exchange that seems to happen between you and the artist that you're working with. There's such a sort of care and meticulousness to the precision with which you're, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if it's the correct term, but I feel like sometimes it's like method acting, you know? like you just kind of need to see things from an artist's perspective, and then that kind of, see where your overlap in vantage point is.
Yeah.
And then that's my access to, trying to help them decide on things sometimes.
Yeah, that takes a lot of generosity on the part of the custom printer to, be so open to the artist's mind and what they're, trying to achieve. And in your case, it really does seem that you have this really embedded exchange going on, and whereby you learn from them and they learn from you at the same time.
Oh, definitely. Yes, I feel the generosity comes back twofold. Like I'm learning a lot from them too, and I weave some of those things into my practice too.
Yeah. There's another talk here, Elisa. I'll get that right, Elisa. Great talk, Pudy. Thank you for sharing. And Rachel, thanks, Pudy. I was laughing during all of your pauses. Yes, the cat's butthole was noticed. Are there more questions? I'm trying to get my view so that I can see what's happening here. Okay, well, do we have any more questions coming from our, we have Jenn Law here. I saw Jenn writing in. There she is. You're indeed the most generous collaborator, Pudy, and I can't wait to resume our weekly print sessions. Also laughing over here. Yes, so great that Jenn could come. That does seem like such an extensive body of work, stretching back to 2013. That's an amazing collaboration.
Yeah, and many of the objects are very different as well. I mean, same but different. But that's invite us back as a duo, Jocelyn.
It sounds like an idea. Well, we do have plans for Jenn.
As you should.
Yeah, well, this has been a very, very rich rich talk. Thank you so much, Pudy. Yes, Heather says she'd love to listen to a duo talk. It would be great. Okay, well, Isla, hi Pudy, great to see you in your talk. I missed the first bit and I'm wondering what you're working on yourself other than printing for others.
This monkey is what I'm working on. I don't know. I'm still at the I fail at a lot of experiments and then something happens. There's no timeline for this. Yeah, I have no good answer. All I can say is great question.
So Pudy, I'll ask you something. I mean, obviously you work with stone lithography. I didn't notice you speaking about stone lithography. Obviously your work has become more about plate lithography. Do you still work with stone at all?
Yeah, I think a lot of what falls on my plate, because let's just talk about the visiting artist residencies for a moment. Those are kind of triaged by Anna, who is our technical director here. And the matches that she makes with me and artists seem to be the photographers. And because of kind of budgetary / time constraints, with, artists' ambition to create or understandable greed for images, stone usually doesn't fall within the timeline. But there was one project that we managed to get some quick stones done because there was something we could only do kind of with touche washes or, some acid tinting and that type of pushing and pulling and that drawing process on the stone. But it doesn't show up as often as I'd like.
Okay.
I still go back to it just to keep up like my skills and for sensuality a little bit, but just the way things have fall into place, it doesn't factor in as largely currently.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, lithographers do, of course, work between the two, and in the talks that we've had, the 3 talks, it's been interesting to see how much stone plays in one and plate in the other. Very interesting. Jennifer Martinez, thanks, Pudy, great talk. Do you mind repeating the tip about CMYK being just the first step?
Okay, let me go back to the tip. I think I wrote it down a bit better, but I have elaborations on that as we are talking. So it is a starting point because it doesn't really survive scrutiny because it's reading distance. It kind of dictates your reading distance in order for the blends of color to be convincing. After you step past that certain encounter, it kind of becomes a little holy. So to remedy that, like I would say, get a better handle on posterization, which is the process of adjusting your lightness and darkness and your midtones, and then outputting those, and printing with the colors that you want, as opposed to having the computer tell you, or like guarantee, or like trust the computer to say, who is basically saying, trust me, in this combination of the 4 things done exactly in the same way that it sees in the computer, you would get exactly the color that you want here. And that usually isn't the case. So instead of like tailoring your skill to match something, instead of tailoring your skill to meet something artificial, take that power back and print with the color that you want and just isolate it where possible.
Makes sense. Morgan says, such a great insight. Thanks, Pudy. Laurel says, how many spot the differences papers did you end up leaving around the city? Did you ever get to wait around and see someone find one?
I tried, did not wait long enough, I guess. There must be 20 some or more in the city. So I don't know how quickly the people were cleaning off of the trains or people would even take them. Part of the inspiration of leaving them there in the first place, and one of the other inspirations of starting that project, was me actually finding a stray book on the TTC, and it was a die-hard coloring activity book. So it would have a maze of you barefooted trying to, escape the building or other scenes from the movie. So, yeah, what was the first part of that question? Was the first part how many?
How many spot the differences papers did you end up leaving around the city?
20 some.
I wonder if they were all gone. Were they? Did you ever check back? Or?
Yeah, they were always all gone. And I'm sure I'm not like Is anyone on the same bus twice? Like, does that happen?
Not sure. Okay, I think we're gonna end off here. There are lots of thanks in the chat for you, Pudy. Jenn, oh, one more from Jenn. You're a very, in brackets, very patient master of CMYK troubleshooting. Smiley face. Thanks so much, Pudy. And also Jocelyn in Print London. Thanks, Jenn. It's wonderful to hear about your own work and the range of projects you've worked on. Yes. So with that, thanks, Jenn. I will close off and say thank you so much, Pudy, for being so generous of spirit in giving your talk tonight. I think you have given us some golden nuggets, as you put it. And it was really interesting to see your work in conjunction with the work that you're doing with custom printing, because I can see the symbiosis between, you know, what's happening in all of those areas. So it was really interesting to have you speaking, and also relative to our previous speakers, Jill Graham and Otis Tamasauskas. I think we have had a really nice experience with these 3 talks, and you know, looking at the gamut of what's happening with the relationship between a printer and an artist, and especially printers that are artists, and you know, that whole relationship. And I think it's come through in all of the talks. So thank you so much, Pudy.
Thank
And
you,
I'd
Mary.
also like to, yeah, thanks once again, our sponsors, the London Arts Council, the City of London, and Satellite Project Space. Okay, great. Please remember that we have all of these videos available, or we'll have them on our website. Currently, we've got 2. Soon, Pudy's will be there, so you can revisit it if you'd like. Thanks very much, and good evening to everyone.